Portfolio Corporate and General Matters. And Senator Patterson, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see you, Ms Foster. Can I ask the Secretariat to table a copy of correspondence from me to Ms Foster that I've shared with you, just for the record? Ms Foster, do you have a response to that correspondence for those watching at home? It was a series of factual questions
Senator
in relation
Patterson, you can table a letter.
I have at every previous round of estimates.
Yeah, no, you can. The Secretariat's not going to do that for you. If you've
sorry, I meant circulate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Directing the Secretariat to table a document for you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks.
As I said, for those watching at home, it's a series of factual questions about the management of the NZYQ cohort and related matters.
Senator, I have not prepared a document to table in response to those questions. As I indicated to you at the spillover estimates, I'll always prioritise bringing myself and my team to the table on the day ready to answer questions from the whole committee over any request to prepare information in advance. You also said at the spillover estimates hearing that we had not that long ago that were I to write to you again in advance of estimates that you would handle it in, quote, exactly the same way you handled my previous request, which was to table the document in Senate estimates. So why have you departed from that commitment that you made to me? So, Senator, I think it's important to read that answer in its entirety. The start of the sentence is I would handle it in exactly the same way, and then I go on to explain what I mean, which is that my consideration will prioritise bringing the team here prepared rather than responding in advance. In fact, in the first instance in February, you had asked me to provide the information to you in advance of Senate estimates rather than to table it.
And that's why I asked you to clarify how you would do it. You must have a different understanding of exactly to me. I think if we go for a English dictionary definition, it would be the same way with no variation. This seems like a pretty significant variation because you previously did table this document and now you are not tabling this document.
So, Senator, I think, as I said, we really need to see the answer in its totality. To say I would do everything exactly the same would not be sensible. As you know, as I explained in both the February estimates and I think in the spillover, but certainly in February, I had gone through a process of seeing what the impost would be, whether or not it was practical for me to do this. And, to suggest that I would go through that same exploratory process a second time round when I had already learnt from that experience, I don't think is a sensible interpretation.
You volunteered that you would handle it in exactly the same way. I didn't put words in your mouth. I asked you, how would you handle it? And you said exactly the same way. This is not exactly the same way, is it?
So, Senator, clearly in your mind, you are asking me, would I table a document? In my mind, I was hearing, would my consideration of your request be handled in the same way?
I think
that's what I was
everybody watching would have
to.
understood that is what I meant. You would be the only person who wouldn't have understood it that way,
Senator
if that's what you're saying.
Senator
I don't think we need to get into insulting
Patterson.
witnesses, 5 minutes into the hearing.
Senator Patterson, do you have questions that are relevant to corporate and general matters? I
Yes.
think that what you're asking is relevant to maybe a later outcome, but we haven't quite got to a question. So,
Thanks, Chair. So, Ms Foster, the reason why I asked you in that spillover hearing whether or not you would handle it in the same way as you previously did is because there was reporting between that last round of estimates and the spillover which suggested that the Minister reprimanded you for the way in which you handled that, and you were careful in how you answered those questions, but you reassured me that whatever took place at that meeting wouldn't affect the way that you would conduct yourself as a witness before this committee.
Senator, I restate that the decision to not to take the resources to specifically prepare a document that I could table at estimates today was absolutely my decision, free of influence or suggestion. It's what I believed was the right and appropriate thing to do.
From where I sit, it doesn't look like that, because prior to this feedback that you got from the Minister, you handled it in one way, and after the feedback you received from the Minister, you're handling it in a different way, even though you said to me that you would handle it in exactly the same way. And the net effect of this is less transparency to the Australian people through their Senate committee process about the government's handling of a
Senator
sensitive issue.
Patterson, that is an unparliamentary thing to put to a witness, given she's literally here answering questions and to you right now. I'd ask you to consider rephrasing that question and actually put a question that's relevant to this part of the program.
Thanks, Chair. And unless you've got a standing order that you can point to about the language that I used, I don't accept that it's unparliamentary.
Well, what I'm asking you to do is act in a parliamentary way. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. But you can't disparage a witness around transparency when she's literally in front of you answering questions right now. If you've got a question to put to her, I'd ask you to do that.
Chair, that's your interpretation. I don't share it. Ms Foster, aren't Australians entitled to observe that they are receiving less information about the activities of their government on an issue of public concern after you had a robust conversation with your minister about it?
So, Senator, I'd like to clarify 2 points. One is, as I think Senator Green, the chair, was suggesting, I am here and my team will be here in the appropriate outcome to respond to your questions. Secondly, the only reason I had a document to table in the February estimates was because I had gone through the process of seeing what the impact of doing that would be on my broader estimates preparation. And as I said consistently in the March hearing, I will prioritise doing that over preparing material in advance. And in fact, specifically, Senator, I said, if I'm diverting resources at the department or putting additional strain on my officers to prepare things in advance, that's a significant factor that would weigh on my decision making. I'm also conscious that our obligation as public servants is to come to estimates prepared to answer questions. So that's also a factor in my thinking about how I approach requests like that. And it was that context, Senator, very shortly before you asked me the question about how would I approach it if you asked me again, that was in my mind when I answered that question.
And I might make the point, Senator Patterson, that in Ms Foster deciding to approach this issue in this way, that is simply reverting to how estimates, at least in this committee, has always operated. I was reminded this morning that prior to the change of government, the opposition, being the Labor Party, would write to the former secretary advising him of issues that they intended to ask questions about and asked him to ensure that officers were ready to answer the questions. That's what happened. Written answers to voluminous questions were not provided by the former government and were never sought by the former opposition. So for Ms Foster to be saying that her officers are ready to answer your questions today is exactly the way that things have always operated under both sides of politics.
I'm sorry, Minister, that's not actually correct. That it's routine in the Attorney General's department, for example, for the Shadow Attorney General, as your Shadow Attorney General did, to write to the department in advance seeking information for that information to be provided.
I'm talking about this department and this committee, and it was never done. It was never done, and Ms Foster's doing exactly the same thing as her predecessor did by making
not
herself
exactly
and
what she
officers
did in
available.
February. Something's changed since February. I wonder what that might be, Minister.
Well, Ms Foster's already answered your question.
Okay. So, Ms Foster...
and seriously, a member of the Liberal Party and Peter Dutton's show is not going to give us a lesson in transparency, are they?
We'll come to
Seriously?
that. Thanks, Minister. We'll come to that. Ms Foster, so given that I did write to you 2 weeks in advance, setting out the information that I sought, is it your evidence this afternoon, or about to be this afternoon, that your officers will be able to answer those questions when they are asked in the outcome?
So, Senator, with the exception of questions where there is a sensitivity, my officers will be ready to answer your questions.
Could you clarify what you mean by a sensitivity?
So, Senator, where there is a public interest issue, where we would go through the proper process of referring to the Minister to seek a claim of that regard.
Okay. All right. Well, we will come to that in time when we get to the relevant portfolios. Moving on.